Oh, for questions.
And you have a couple of gifts. There's just one thing, whatever money you find in these bags, I'd like it returned to me. What you do is you open that big shopping bag and you'll look inside and you pick up the small shopping bag. And look inside and you'll find a stone. It's a gold stone. And it's wrapped in little paper, and that little paper, well, it tells you something important about that gold stone. Because you're going to leave here today feeling a little bit wealthier. That gold stone was brought here 200 years ago by some of the first Puerto Rican settlers in Hawaii. Okay, now, what do you do with this gold rock, this gold piece of stone here? There's some paper wrapped around it. Take that paper, open it up, read it. There's a ritual on it. That ritual will guarantee that that stone will bring prosperity to you. I tell you, it will bring prosperity to you. And there's a little piece of paper. Open it up and read it. There's a kind of mystical saying on it, whatever you can hear in your mind from those words. That's the message to you to repeat every night before you go to bed. You take a pillowcase, you take that stone, you put it inside the pillowcase, and then you put your feet inside there, and you tie it off with a little piece of cord that's in there somewhere. If it isn't there on the way out, you better ask for it. A little piece of gold cord. Now, in the morning, you take that stone and you take it, and you hold it really tight in your left hand, and you wish for the best things in your life. And you wish for the best things in your life, and then you take it. And then you take this stone and you put it in a secret place. Okay, now, that's not all. You get a bunch of papers, 10 sheets of paper, I believe they're all different colors. They're all magical different colors. Those pieces of papers, you know what you do with them? You write all the crap in your life that bugs you every day. All the garbage, all the people, everything. You write it on these sheets of paper. And you know what you do? You crumple it up and you crumple it up really tight and you throw it forward. Forward. Because the people in front of you are going to catch it and they're going to take it and they're going to shred it. And you know what they're going to do when they shred it? They're going to shred all the crap in your life out of you. Believe it or not, this works now. This works. I know my grandmother did it. My grandmother did it, and she prospered. She prospered. She had 14 children. Okay, now. Start the writing. Start the writing. Start the writing. Crunch those papers up. Drum code. Get the people here that are going to take those papers and shred them. And some of them may even put some of that shredded paper underneath their clothing just to keep their spirits warm.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on the great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field to a resting place for those who here gave their lives so that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hollow this ground. So brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add and detract. The world will no remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated, to be the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion, that this cause, from this which gave the last measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve, that these dead shall not have dead in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish in earth. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived, so dedicated, can long endure. We are left on the great battlefield that we come to dedicate worship on this land to everyone. It is together fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot follow the ground. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate to brave men living in death who struggle here and consecrated far above our poor power out of the track. The way we really is, no longer matters what we say here, but we can never forget what they did here. So in the last word, that you have to contend with every day. Read them out loud so they can be thrown up there and shredded. Read them out loud. Read them out loud. Now we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hold this ground. The brave men living dead who struggle here have concentrated far above our core power to add in the track. The world will never know how long we never ago we stayed here, but we can never forget that we've been here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they fought here have thus far known we have had. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task before us, that from these hours dead, we take increased devotion, that the cause of which they gave the rational measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have new birth of freedom, that this government for the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. For scores and 70 years ago, our fathers fought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived the liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And now, we engage in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated to longing war. We have been on the great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who are here gave their lives for the nation might live. It is all together, fitting and proper that we should do this. But in the larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, and we cannot follow the ground. The great men and women living and dead who struggle here and concentrated here far above our core powers and the track. The world is little known, no longer remember why we stand here, but we can never forget what they did. It is for us to live, rather, to be advanced here, to the unfinished work in which we have fought here, and thus so we will be advanced. It is us, rather, for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this, these other days, we take increased devotion to the cause from which they gave us, and the last full measure of devotion that we here resolve. The dead shall not have died in vain, for this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government for the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. For the Lord, and 7 years ago, our fathers have brought forth to this continent a new nation to see the liberty and dedicate to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We met on a great battlefield of that war, and we have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here give their lives to the nation that might
Raise them out
live.
loud. Send them out into the atmosphere. Send them out into outer space. That's where all that garbage belongs. Send it out there. Send it out there. Read them out loud. Shred them. Read them out loud and shred them. Come on, shredders, read them out loud. What's going on in here? We got a lot of lazy shredders. We got to get those words out there to the stratosphere.
Whatever this is
louder, louder, let's hear the voices.
Fear of touching deep wounds. How about the open creativity, both my husband and me, in good health, not finding a way to prosper.
Racism, atheism, financial stress, recovery work, oppression.
Scheduling issues. Deadline. Subways and feeling
Oh, I don't like this person. This is blank. What are you talking about here? You know what? Back to you. My fights with harsh and arguments with my family.
Racism, xenophobia, injustice, war, and violence. All this technophobia. My fights with workers are due to my family. World hunger, hatred, cynics.
Oh man, I don't know if this is Cantonese, Mandarin, or Chinese, but I feel you.
The main Republican politicians. Boyfriend, hard. Homelessness, equality.
Raise those voices, raise those voices.
Millionaires, políticos, orgullo y fama, odio,
The colonial condition.
inequity, anxiety, resentment,
Organized religion
people,
is
brutal
stupid.
leaders, world, nothing is enough. Stop Trump. Feeling awkward around people.
Quiero que vengan en mi casa sin haberte mi divorcio.
Procrastination. Untalented. Oh, falta de empatía. Russian bots. Self-destructive behavior. Camera? On my camera. Putin. Chinese phone calls.
Woodcraft.
Deception. Fake news. Lack of sex.
That's none of mine.
Anti-gay. Feeling awkward. I think it's yours. Unconscious job. Allow yourself to feel pain, release the need for space. Private school.
Brain drama.
Fear. Donald Trump.
Never give up.
Enough money.
All right, here we go.
Hate. Horarios políticos.
Having to work to pay bills and not have full access to a free life, to fully create, warmth and love, enjoy life as I please. My mother, my sister, psychosis parents, forcing ideas, manipulation, kids, disrespectful, preferred pronouns.
Productivity culture. Jobless. Alone. Unwanted. Boring people. Irritating people. Greedy people.
Let the earth stop climate change.
Politicos.
People who destroy the earth.
Aircraft.
There's that.
Get rid of all the hate and toxins.
Crime.
Time wasting, poor nutrition, complaints, negative attitude. Marital stress.
Jealous friends, toxic moms.
Pride and energy for others instead of
How will I
myself.
make it?
I want to so
Do you love me? Do I love him? You drive.
I am happy. Nervous. Hard. No.
Okay. Announce.
Trying to rebuild bonds, rebuild the bonds without the help of the chair of the Bond Development Committee, sitting on his hands, embarrassing a past record, and this more than 20 years of handwork developing an institution. Talk about the handwriting.
I am upset that I don't know what to read or what to do. I don't know what to write. New York accent. Insomnia. Shoelaces.
Otherwise, it's good. It's a moral, unjust
I am
moral.
correct. I am not being the most respect I deserve. Not being stuck in my creative self. Or craft. That was my technique.
Handwriting.
Just asking for my numbers. Procrastination. Exhaustion. Hate, fear, and anxiety.
More hands up. The excessive impulse to do more things. Being horny.
No, but a lot of them are just whispering. They're not really yelling.
I wish I could believe for sure he is real. Fuck no healthcare, fuck doctors who think it is still seeking behavior. Constitution. Anxiety about future.
Negative self-talk.
Having to work to pay bills and not have full access to a free life to fully engage in learn life essentially.
Scared.
Well, there's a professor out there, Chon Noriega, the doctorate out of UCLA. He has some things to say about me. I haven't seen it or heard it, but I do have an escape route through this exit over here. So if you'd be patient with the whisperers up front here.
I am honored to have been asked to give a presentation on Raphael Montañez Ortiz as part of the closing celebrations for this groundbreaking retrospective organized by el Museo del Barrio. I regret not being able to do so in person, but I am grateful for having spent a few days with Raphael earlier this week. I first met Raphael 30 years ago when I co-curated an exhibition on installation art at Cornell University's Art Museum. The exhibition examined installation art by way of 8 Latino artists, an unheard of approach at that time, and perhaps still now. How can Latinos be the measure of a global artistic medium like painting, sculpture, installation, performance, and so on? Subsequent physical violence against the artwork in the exhibition led a coalition of mostly Latino students to take over the president's building, demanding that the university hire more Latino faculty, increase library holdings on Latino culture and Latin American culture, and invest resources in student support. They knew that this violence against Latino art reflected institutional neglect. Raphael was there at the center of this moment. The first night that the students occupied the building, he joined them, organizing a videotaped trial of the university as a way for the students to formalize their complaints, give evidence from their personal experiences, and develop a set of related demands. They were threatened with expulsion, but eventually succeeded in getting their demands met. In this moment, Raphael moved effortlessly between his destructivist art practice, his role as a teacher, and his uncanny ability to help effect institutional change. Over the last 30 years, our friendship has certainly changed my life too, as a scholar, as a teacher, and as a person. He's also changed my understanding of history, from the Enlightenment notion of progress to something much messier, and that often is best told by going backwards. In my presentation today, I will make no attempt at an overview, nor will I do a deep dive into a single work of art. Each of these require substantially more time to fully grasp the range of Raphael's work. Instead, I offer some musings on Raphael's art as it relates to the idea of a museum. I start with this slide of an action by the Art Workers Coalition in 1970. The tall man on the right is artist Ralph Ortiz, as he was known at the time. Ralph was born in 1934, and since 1957, his artistic practice has centered on destruction. He explains such work in his 1962 Destructivism, a Manifesto. And I read, "There are today throughout the world a handful of artists working in a way which is truly unique in art history. These artists are destroyers, materialists, and sensualists, dealing with process directly. These artists are destructivists and do not pretend to play God's happy game of creation. On the contrary, theirs is a response to the pervading will to kill." This manifesto offers a global vision as a context for the artist's own work, even as his own work itself is quite particular in its form, material, and address. Ortiz's manifesto offers a global vision as a context for the artist's own work. Now in this image, you see Ortiz strangling a Museum of Modern Art board trustee, played by Jean Touche, while another privileged elite, played by John Hendricks, aims a gun at the protesters, shouting the N-word. Touche and Hendricks were members of the recently formed Guerrilla Art Action Group, which Ortiz in many ways inspired and encouraged. Now mind you, by 1970, Ortiz's work was already in the MoMA collection. MoMA director Alfred Barr actually helped Ortiz carry this work into the museum in 1963 after Richard Hulsenbeck, one of the founders of Dada, encouraged him to see Ortiz's work. This 1961 work is the first in a series Ortiz called Archaeological Finds. Unlike archaeologists, though, Ortiz did not recover fragments with the goal of reconstructing a lost object from the past. Instead, he turned household furniture into fragments removing them from their usefulness within consumer and domestic culture, and leaving behind an art object. This archaeology of the present is an approach that has since then been widely taken up by artists. Like an archaeologist, in this talk, we're going back in time as I'm telling the story, 1970 to 1962 to 1963, and then 1961. Let's go back a few more years to 1957, when Ortiz starts working on this manifesto about destruction as a basis for art. Ortiz was a student at the Pratt Institute, courtesy of the GI Bill, and he had just been temporarily expelled. So he was destroying 16mm film prints from old movies that were being distributed by Castle Films. These films could be bought at local stores for home viewing. In this moment, artists around the world were turning to the detritus of consumer culture, and that included old films that were no longer in theatrical release, but were entering the home as private objects. This is a very interesting moment because the film industry itself is not archiving itself. So that's happening in the home. Now, in art scholarship, Bruce Conner's A Movie is a key work that marks that pivot point in 1958. Conner is drawing from the same Castle films that Ortiz used. In writing about the film's impact, curator Bruce Jenkins argues that Conner would almost single-handedly redirect the materialist perspectives of late modernism onto cinema. Here, by way of the critic, we have a point of origin, a defining work, and the artist as a heroic figure. But Conner's film is actually more conventional than modernist. It follows the arc of Hollywood classical narrative supported by classical music. In this case, Ottorino Respighi's Pines of Rome in 1924, a symphonic poem allegorizing the dawn of the Roman Empire, Roman Republic, through its military and roadways. Here, colonialism, empire, and the artist, diagnostic modernism, all follow the same form. The problem and the critique both lean on the same big story about progress, just two different sides of it. The proof? Those who write about a movie treat it as a silent film, a sequence of images, that is, as a visual argument and not as an audio-visual experience grounded in affect, which is essentially what cinematic narrative is. Meanwhile, in 1958, Ortiz completes two works, newsreel and cowboy and Indian film. And I'll show brief clips from each of these.
Now you disappoint me.
In making these films, Ortiz used a tomahawk to destroy each film print, issuing a war chant while shaking the fragments in a medicine bag, then randomly pulling out pieces and splicing them together irrespective of their orientation. Ortiz was not just manipulating the moving image as a critique of Hollywood, he was intervening at a material level by destroying and transforming the artifacts of media culture that were now archived in the home, alongside other consumer appliances. Ortiz violently fractures sound, image, and narrative, releasing the rationalism, nationalism, and colonialism that are structured into narrative cinema as a commercial industrial product. I'm not trying to displace Bruce Conner so that Raphael Ortiz can be the hero of modernism's turn toward new material forms and old political critiques. Instead, I am pointing to the concept that troubles art history, and that is the notion of a meanwhile. meanwhile confounds historical narratives based on a point of origin, a defining work, and a heroic artist. There is always a meanwhile. What if we wrote our own art histories with that sense of possibility based on planetary, genetic, and social interdependence? And that's what Ortiz has proposed over the last 8 decades. Yes, play piano, make films, and write books, but just use an axe. Which brings me to the title of my talk, Ralph Ortiz's Museum of the Future. The phrase Museum of the Future comes from Ortiz's 1965 solo exhibition, Penny Candy and Fudge Assemblages, in Provincetown, Massachusetts. The venue was Barrett's Candy Store, where Ortiz worked during summers over a 5-year period, and which was owned by his in-laws. The assemblages were installed around the candy store with descriptive text underneath. With the exception of the preview, the candy store went about business as usual during the run of the exhibition, with Ortiz making fudge and pulling taffy, not as a performance, but as a summer job to support his family and rent studio space. His candy manifesto, seen here in draft form, appears anomalous within the context of his emerging destructivist practice. It's about making non-essential and non-instrumental things that give pleasure not to the eyes, as with the visual arts, but to the mouth, wherein, as he writes, the sweet tooth leadeth to the soul. The manifesto ends with the line, "The candy store is the museum of the future." As you can see, Ortiz has crossed out the typewritten word studio and then the handwritten word church before settling on museum. If in the early 1960s, Klaus Oldenburg, Edward Kienholz, and Yayoi Kusama, among others, created artificial environments for restaging and habitation or consumption within an art space, here Ortiz turns the non-art space into the museum of the future. In the process, he also breaks down the boundary between the viewer and object by positing the aesthetic experience as visual and oral, and as symbolic and somatic. This shift in the idea of what art is, from something located in the art object and art space to one expressed through everybody's body, guided his role in the development of various new art forms. I want to jump ahead to 1969, just before the protest performance in 1970, where I started, in order to describe the fracture that was then taking place with respect to Ortiz and other racial minorities in the avant-garde. In 1969, Ortiz founded the first U.S. Latino museum, El Museo del Barrio, in New York City. But if Ortiz moved fluidly between two worlds, between an art world and a community that had been excluded from that art world, the writing of art history did not do so as well. So his own artistic production fell between two categories that became mutually exclusive in the United States after 1968. Avant-garde art, now seen as by heroic white men, and minority art, understood to be by women and non-whites. Even so, for Ortiz, El Museo del Barrio represented an infrastructure or cultural institution whose aim would be, as he said, regaining our right to exist in a larger context. Now, the museum has in many ways exemplified that over going into its sixth decade. But we have to admit that it's easier to say that than to do it. Now, bringing these two worlds together is easier said than done, which explains why Ortiz uses destruction as the conceptual framework and the method for what he is proposing. In breaking the entrenched narratives for art history, it has taken decades for scholars and curators to recuperate artists like Eva Hesse, Muriel Latterman-Ukeles, and Charlotte Moorman as central to the changes taking place in the art world in the 1960s New York and elsewhere. By the way, Ortiz went to high school with Hesse, college with Latterman-Ukeles, and collaborated extensively with Moorman. He is part of their history just as they are part of his. but a divide remains within the larger field. So what do we do? If we were to apply destructivism to this question today, we might end up with the following statement. The museum of the future resides not in buildings and institutions, but in the bodies and bodies of work that have been kept outside. Do not accept your exclusion as the framework from which you then speak, for in doing so, you accept their argument and end up saying little more than, yes, but. No, start with meanwhile and tell a different story, one that has the audacious humility of existing in a world filled with other people and other living things. They, who now control access, are not the measure of all things, but neither are we. The artist whose works move you to take up this cause know that about art. And so do the museum guards, school children, and janitors who look like you and who are the ones filling up museums during the workdays. We are already in the world, so let's start describing it on other terms than the ones we have been handed. Now, this is a bit of speculation on my part, but in terms of the ideas that Raphael's been working with over the last 8 decades and the very kind of incremental way in which he has developed his practice, I think that his work offers us some ideas to what's already happening, which is an effort by generations of artists, some coming into the field, some having been there for a while, to change that narrative and to shift things and to do it in a way that's not about just making a little space, but about rethinking what the whole means. And I think that that's a part of what remains extremely important in terms of his work. And I'm not talking about manifestos and making statements about how things should be. It's making work that rethinks what art is and what our relationship to art is. So I'm going to end with Raphael's current work. Since 2018, he has returned to the painterly work of placing destroyed objects on surfaces. You see an example here. Now, from about 1960 to 1962, he was using this approach as he transitioned from abstract expressionist painting to archaeological finds. And it is a very thoughtful gradation of moving from one to the other. And he did this in dialogue, both in terms of talking and sharing readings, but also in terms of what their own practices were doing with his mentor, Robert Richenberg, who was one of the original abstract expressionist artists and was teaching at Pratt at the time. And he is the one who fully supported what he was doing and what other artists like Muriel Latterman Ukele's were doing, and he paid the price. He ended up being fired for refusing to censor their work so that they could go forward and continue developing as artists. So these new works that I'm showing one example of started with, eventually became known as a series called Potlatch. And it consists of broken dollhouses, related furniture, mini pianos, toys, and other small objects. So the scale of what Raphael did using the furniture from his own home is now gone to the more symbolic one of dollhouse items that you can purchase online. And they're arranged in shallow boxes lined with colored fake fur and then covered with plexiglass. So, and they range from small boxes that are similar in scale to Joseph Cornell's box assemblages to much larger works that are 4 feet wide, maybe 4 feet wide, maybe 5 feet tall. In his earlier work, in the early 60s though, the work was symbolic in addressing the trauma of history. Whereas the more recent work, the Potlatch series, is a playful return to this turning point in his career, his formal education, and personal life. Each work is attentive to color, shape, and composition. Clearly they are constructions as much as they are destructions, and they do not represent anything other than playful objects. There is something about their arrangement that suggests the pileup of destruction following a hurricane or a man-made environmental disaster, and at the same time, they are also simply beautiful. Ortiz makes no claims to the potlatch as an indigenous ceremony on his part, other than as a way of rethinking his own relationship with destruction, property, social status, and the act of gifting. And in this regard, and what I think is very moving about this series, the fairly ample series that you worked on between 2018, around 2020, 2021, is that the potlatch series can be seen as his gift to his earlier self. But it is also a stepping stone to the next work, such as the piece that the New York Times identified as the standout work in this exhibition. So I'll end by saying, and I suspect he's on the stage, that was his plan, to be on the stage rather than in the audience. I'll say, Raphael, you not only created the Museum of the Future, but you have also taught us that the Museum of the Future resides in all of our bodies. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Sharpenel. I'm the Executive Director of el Museo del Barrio. I would like to announce, thank you. I would like to announce our last activity of the exhibition, which is a really interesting conversation, really interesting panel between Yasmin Ramirez, Rodrigo Maura, moderated by Rocío Aranda. Muchas gracias, Rocío, Rodrigo, and Yasmin. I would like to thank Chon Noriega for the deep thinking, for years and years of friendship and support to careers, Raphael Montañez Ortiz careers. I would like to thank Raphael Montañez Ortiz for the great performance that we all experienced this afternoon. Amazing, that deeply touched me. Thank you, Raphael Montañez Ortiz, for founding el Museo del Barrio in 1969, for 70 years of career as an artist, as an educator, and also for being this great activist that has shaped the scene for Latinos in New York. As Chon Noriega said, Raphael Montañez Ortiz has been a deep thinker, not only about the art community, but about museums. So El Museo del Barrio is a community museum that has to become a platform for conversations and discussions about inclusion, about equity, and obviously about a community that has been historically excluded from major institutions in the US. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of the exhibition, Bank of America. Muchísimas gracias, Bank of America, for supporting this exhibition. Tony Bechara, Terra Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and the Department of Cultural Affairs of New York. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Bienvenidos al Museo del Barrio y empezamos con el panel. Gracias.
That was amazing. Does everyone feel like you had a fantastic catharsis just now?
Yes.
Yasmin said she's going to buy a shredder and do it every day.
Yes.
Thank you for that. That was beautiful. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Rocío. I'm a former curator of El Museo del Barrio, where I organized a show for the museum's 45th anniversary that included a section on Raphael's work and his founding of the museum. Prior to that, I organized a retrospective of his work at Jersey City Museum, and El Museo purchased a work from that exhibition that now hangs in the galleries. I hope you got a chance to see it. It's the giant sofa destruction. I'm joined here by Rodrigo Mora, Chief Curator of El Museo del Barrio. Together with Julieta Gonzalez, Rodrigo organized the exhibition Raphael Montañez Ortiz, a contextual retrospective, a really excellent overview of Raphael's work featuring works by other artists of the avant-garde. I'm here also with Yasmin Ramirez, independent curator and scholar, part of the adjunct faculty at the City University of New York. And of course, by the man of the hour who needs no introduction, Raphael Montañez Ortiz, who just recently retired from his many years of teaching at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and who is the founding director of El Museo del Barrio. Oh, you know what? I did mean to set my thing so that we don't go over, because I know everybody wants to ask questions, so I'm going to set it. Okay. So I'm going to ask everyone's question, but if it's okay with you, I'm going to start with Rodrigo and Yasmin really quick. For Rodrigo, I would love if you would tell a little bit about why this exhibition is important specifically for El Museo and its audiences.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I thank you so much for the introduction, and Rocio. First of all, I want to say, how honored I am to be here with you all today, especially with Raphael, but also with you, Yasmin, and you, Rocio, and also in spirits with Chon Noriega, because you are really, people who inspired this exhibition. You and Chon with your scholarship, you with your long-term curatorial commitment with Raphael's work. So it's truly an honor to be part of this lineage of curators and scholars and researchers who worked with Raphael. And also I'd like to acknowledge it's really beautiful here with the shredded paper. You can't see it from there, but it's really beautiful. And such a wonderful performance, Ralph. Kudos, and you really use the scale of the theater and the stage audience dichotomy, dialectics in such a beautiful way. Really, really wonderful performance. I think everybody is of the same opinion. But to your question, Rocio, thank you. I think this show is very important for several reasons for the exhibition program of El Museo. I think it can be, a scene, of course, because of most importantly, because of the work of Raphael itself, for what the work does to our understanding of art of the moment, art of the 20th century. I'd like to just quote you for a second on that point briefly. The intellectual leap that Ortiz took in the late 50s was to make a connection between his sense of social confinement as a minority artist and the formal structures that the early modernists faced. I think this is bridging these two worlds together is really a major contribution to the field, and I think this exhibition wanted to reframe that, to go back to this and reinterpret that legacy. So that's, I think, the number one reason. The second reason, I think also, and here I want to shout out to Julieta Gonzalez, who's the co-curator of the show with me, was to really attest to the huge importance of Raphael as a thinker. I think this is something we wanted to, come across with the show as well, and an activist, and how he would, really, in a way, in an interesting way, disregard the separation between spirit and matter, if you want, or theory and praxis, if you want, and as an activist, as a thinker, as an artist. So this is also why we wanted to, make it a contextual retrospective, as you say, and have his work as like a thread telling the history of art and the history of the field for the last 8 decades, right? Since the 50s into the present. In that regard, I think it was, I also would like to mention how much this is a show that really brings together a lot of, his most important and relevant works of that time, bringing them to the same place for the first time, especially like loans like, the 2 sculptures from the Tate, having the 6 archaeological finds together on the same space. So we really wanted to, have this combination of different lines of force coming from Raphael's work And yeah, so this, I hope this helps answering your question.
It's a unique opportunity to see the early destroyed pieces of furniture all in the same place all at once, including the pieces from the Tate,
Yes.
which had almost been forgotten, right?
True, yeah, I think this is a piece that entered that collection relatively recently. It's the two original furniture. One is a furniture, the other is a piano. You can see a piano as a furniture piece too if you want, if you don't play it especially. Both coming from his participation at the Dia Symposium in 1966 in London, yeah.
Yasmin, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you see Raphael in relation to the activism among artists in New York City in the late 60s and in relation to Nuyorican movements as they developed here.
Raphael's been a leader, absolute leader, since the 1960s. Even from before. I do want to say just one thing about this exhibition and what makes it so exciting is the sightlines, the way that you've created an exhibition that captures the multifaceted nature of Ralph's work. Just walking through it, I think one of my favorite parts, besides of course seeing this is the first time I've ever seen all of these pieces together. This is really historic. I don't think they've ever been shown together, all the destruction pieces, but also the Maya semi pieces, and being able to see them in the same room, in the sightline, with the indigenous pieces. Each one is separate, but we can see the relationship. It's stunning.
Thank you so much.
You know, so I was really, really happy to witness this, to feel it as an aesthetic experience, which, you know, Raphael does visually, but also takes into consideration the body, right? And the beauty of feeling art, verbalizing art, dealing with your issues. You know, art is a release in some ways, right? A cathartic spirit that art can bring about. In terms of activism, I mean, the Puerto Rican art movement in New York, for me, begins in 1969 with Ralph. With Ralph Ortiz joining the Art Workers Coalition on the one hand, conceiving, because he's not the founding director, he's the conceiver of El Museo del Barrio. That's very deep. I mean, he was not in fact, one of, I think, an issue that happens with Ralph's work is that he thinks so far ahead. He's not interested necessarily in having created a formal institution without a component that would be mobile. Because he was extremely critical, as he could tell you himself, of the institutions of museums and who gets to run them. So he was anti-museum in some ways, even as he proposed the museum. He's thinking of a different structure. And in that respect, what also makes him so exemplary and begins this movement is that he meets a bunch of art students at the time, the future founders of Taller Boricua, and he immediately brings them into the fold and says, you know what? Why don't you form the first artist advisory committee? Museums, you know, they were fighting for museum reforms like the artist advisory, community input, all of these things that we basically have today is something that Ralph pioneered and that this institution pioneered. And so it was that collaboration as well as work with the Young Lords. I mean, these three movements coming together, the Young Lords, the founders of Taller Boricua, and Ralph conceiving and working to change this institution as a conception, but also going out and institutional critique, doing the protests with the workers, taking over the office of the director of the Metropolitan Museum and saying, you've got to share your resources with this community. It's astounding. He truly is someone that I have very deep respect for and brings together the vanguardist artistic practice with the vanguard political practice. Okay, yeah.
That's exactly right. Do you want some lemonade or water?
I'm very fine.
Lemonade?
Yeah.
And do you want to say anything, respond to?
I'm just thankful for all of you who, with all my stubbornness, pushed me out of the shadows.
Excellent. There you go. Here's a fresh one. Do you want to say anything about because Yasmin brought it up?
I'll take that over there.
Maya Semi.
Yes, I'll take this one.
Take this one. Okay. I'll keep this one.
Okay, let me have that. Okay.
I was just saying because Yasmin brought up the Maya Semis, which have been cleaned. For anyone who saw them before, they've been cleaned and they just look superb. The colors are so rich. And to see them in conjunction with the actual historic Taino objects in conversation with one another, I'd love to hear your thoughts about either whatever Rodrigo and Yasmin said or a little bit about the Maya Semis.
Well, the thing that I found kind of interesting is that the works won't be allowed into Mexico because they might have all sorts of funny little bugs in them. What's interesting about it is though, it's footage I shot at a chicken slaughterhouse in Brooklyn. It was the last kosher chicken slaughterhouse in Brooklyn. And I saw what they did. I mean, they laundered the feathers. They sort of like dry cleaned them. And I found out that they deliver them to the sort of 42nd Street, these stores where a lot of people that make clothing and so on, the garment district, it's called. And that's where I went to find out where they sold them, and I bought them for that piece. But there's still this real distrust for the idea of any vermin, moving from one country to another and destroying crops and things like that. So it was kind of interesting to understand those aspects of the work which were not predictable, and I had no thought of the idea that these feathers from these chickens, which I saw slaughtered, and then the feathers sort of all peeled off, creating a danger for the agriculture of a country. It sort of turned this whole thing on its head, and I then washed the feathers very carefully when I used them. Yeah, and it's kind of, sometimes I'd have people used to visit, and I'd have these, the clothesline, my parents used to hang clothes on these little clips kind of thing, and my apartment would have all these feathers on these little clips.
Each feather was clipped.
Yeah.
Being washed to dry.
Right, to make sure that they didn't harm the agriculture of the country or the artworks that they would become a part of, and where the works might result. Right.
I think that kind of care that you're talking about, the washing of the feathers, is part of a line that you can see throughout your body of work. We talked a little bit about this, about the work as a kind of healing as a line that goes through, and how sometimes we see you in photographs, you're dressed as a shaman. And so I wonder if we could talk a little bit about this through line of healing in the work that you see and the care that he's talking about taking with.
Do you want to take it over? No, I think that this idea of the shamanic framework, the shamanic framework is something that I think it's really, crosses the work, because it's in the very beginning with the film work. And I'm very impressed by the film work, the early film work, and how strongly disorienting it is, right? And I think this is something that I really have to thank Julieta Gonzalez for having opened my eyes to because she was very interested in working with Raphael's PhD dissertation as a conceptual basis for this exhibition, and the physio-psychoalchemy concept, right? So there were like two concepts that we pulled, we got from there, which is this idea of healing. I think it's everywhere, and I would really like to hear Ralph talking about it too. But also the idea of the ethnoaesthetics that we addressed a little bit in terms of the miasms and the connections, the several connections that they allow us to do in the show, but also this idea of like an ethnographic critique, no? So it's not, I think that's extremely important, that it's, there's a turn there. No, it's not about describing the other, and I think we wanted to put Lotte Baumgarten's work in like as a, you can call it like a comparative, but also as a comment. No, it's a comment to Ralph's work, and so these two notions, the physio-psychoalchemy and the ethnoaesthetics, we brought from his writings, and we use them in the show, also almost like to test them, test the theories in exhibition form. And I would like just very briefly also to mention like the most recent works that I'm very fond of. And I was extremely also impressed seeing them when I first visited Raphael in his home studio in New Brunswick, because they have something that it's very domestic. No, it's that idea of the house that appears as the material, as iconography, but also the making of them, working on a flat surface and using, a material that's found online. So I found that work very fascinating too, yeah. So it brings full loop, like a full circle, because it also, refers back to the, archaeological finds as, the furniture works that he was destroying. But it's just a few thoughts around, how this idea of healing appeared throughout the show, yeah.
In thinking about actually healing, but also shamanism and the concept of the ceremonial being an important part, we were talking earlier about some of the performances. We were thinking specifically of the one in northern Italy that you did at sort of the base of the Alps, one of the early piano sacrifices, where the piano is carried by folks up the side of the mountain and sacrificed there. This is something that recurs over. How many piano sacrifices have you done now?
Many.
Over 100? Over 100? Wow, the last count I had was like 80 something.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Maybe we could talk a little bit about this idea of ceremony and how significant it is in the work. There's like a process that you think very carefully about and you record, and we've seen in the notes the order of things in which things are supposed to happen in a performance, and this ritualistic kind of pace that you have in the performances.
Was that a question?
Just your thoughts on, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your reflections on the piano sacrifice in the mountains.
Well, I had a very eccentric grandmother who, with things, with nature, I remember I used to play a lot of sports, handball, basketball, baseball, so on, and I would always be spraining a finger, and she would always go into her garden and get a twig, and then she would find a couple of certain kind of ants, and that she would wrap them around the little twig and around my finger and a Band-Aid, and like 3 days later everything was fine. So I right away was really impressed, and I tried having a little ant farm for a while, but that didn't work. But whenever I would hurt myself, I would go to her. I hurt my knee at one point, and she did the same thing. She dug and dug and dug with this root, and then crushed it all and used when you want a liquid to get thick, well, I forgot what that is used. Cornstarch? Yes. And she mixed it all together and put it with a sort of like some kind of grassy result from bashing the root and thing. Put it on my knee, and like about 2 weeks later, everything was fine. And yet, at the beginning, it was, really swollen. So and she also talked to spirits. So, and I found that especially fascinating. Of course, a lot of my friends that have always stayed distant from me, it saved me from, some difficult situations, because I would promise them that my grandmother's ghosts would visit them. And so they would quickly turn around and walk away and, say, I have a family, my sister's an astrologer, and I have an uncle who's always doing the tarot cards for people. So that was part of it. I remember I was heading home. The family had gone out for a dinner, and we're going up the stairs, and my mother says, "Stop!" My hands up, and we're all like standing there. Okay, well, something's happening here. And there was a very thin string across the step, and some white powder. And she opens up a pocketbook, and she pulls out this little brush, and she brushes all the powder into a little pile. And then she puts it into, like a little bag kind of thing. And she cut the string and wrapped it up and put it into this thing. She went around downstairs, went around to the back garden of the house, and we didn't see her for about 10, 15 minutes. And then she came back smiling. She said, "Okay, we can all go up the steps." That kind of sort of consciousness of the sense of identity and meaning within identity. I always thought of us as kind of like the ghost people or something.
So it was in a sense that those family actions that involved maybe using nature in healing and the rituals of wrapping things up is deeply influential in your work. I think we can see that in terms of, for example, even the candy destructions that Chon mentioned at the beginning, right? Seeing something that is, a sustenance as a material for creating something that is, in a way, candy can be healing also, but creating sculpture too. I was thinking about, we talked a little bit about his work as an activist, and I was thinking about the newer work, since you brought them up, Rodrigo. What's interesting about the newer works to me is that they also are reminiscent of a little bit of a television screen, with your history of film and video, which is so important. But also their activist work, when you think about the imagery of the early priest who did all the images, Fray Bernardo de las Casas, and the imagery that you see there, and you think about, from the 60s to the current time that we're living in, the kind of racial strife that we're talking about, those images become so important in that work. Also, the book cover about the Holocaust. It seems to me there's this line also of activism that's going, even in these sculptural and the works that are about accumulation, where you see these layers on top. It'd be nice to say a little bit more about the box.
Well, I did a piece at the Los Angeles Art Festival that I had wanted to do for a long time, and it grew out of a relationship. I lived in a Jewish Orthodox community, which was really kind of interesting, because I was like the Shabbat goy, and so I got to know a number of rabbis, and I got a lot of sort of sense of, because like if I heard the word Kabbalah, I would right away be really curious about what it was. And there's one particular story that one of the rabbis used to tell. He was a like a social worker in the family and helped families get along, kind of thing. And this elderly couple were always sitting together on you know, like with these two chairs when they face each other. What are they, love seats or something like that? Mm-hmm. Kind of thing. And they would always read poetry to each other and tell stories to each other and stuff like that. And they were very happy and very loving. And they had a loving daughter amongst a number of children. And this particular daughter was especially loving. And people used to say when the three of them were together on that couch, like it would glow, like, you know, there'd be a, and that it was explained to me as some sort of bioplasmic glow, you know, kind of thing. And so I was thinking, gee, I'd like to do that work. I'd like to realize it because it fed into the whole idea of releasing spirit from my work. Mm-hmm. And the idea of all of these materials that came from nature, that were abstracted from nature, but that served no immediate healing purpose, but some larger healing purpose. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I sort of recalled the story of the daughter that was especially loving died from polio. There was that whole polio thing where a lot of people became ill. I think even President Roosevelt became crippled from it. And that, so they didn't suffer and argue and fight and blame each other or anything like that. They continued their loving passion for each other. Mm-hmm. And they enjoyed the sense of the daughter spirit being around them also as part of the love that they had for each other. Mm-hmm. And but the rabbi in the discussion, it was like, but she had to be released from the furniture which had the love. In other words, which bound her to it was the love that she had experienced with her parents and when they were together. And so what they wanted to have done was to have the daughter released from the furniture. And so some special, I don't know if he was a rabbi, if he was some sort of priest of some kind of, you know, dealing with spirits. And I mean, I know of things like the Dybbuk and, you know, like that, but this was very special. And so they performed the ritual, and the furniture, as it was told, the angelic impression of the daughter on the furniture, as they released it more and more with prayer and sacrifice of small objects around it, it got lighter and lighter, and then it disappeared, like she had joined her parents, kind of thing. And it seemed to have relieved a lot of the pressure from the family entirely, like when she then went and joined, you know, her parents, kind of thing. Well, here I was at the art fair, and I said, I'm going to try to serve that piece. And so I went and did some search furniture in secondhand stores of an elderly couple that owned this piece of furniture that was like that furniture, that love seat furniture. And I got lots of little objects. I think they were called, I didn't know exactly what tchotchkes, I think was. And so I went to a lot of the secondhand stores and I bought a lot of the tchotchkes. And I brought them back to my studio, and I did some research with some of the Kabbalistic prayers and some of the Hebrew prayers. And it's an impossible language. It's an amazing, Hebrew is an amazing language. And I got involved, and I worked on this piece, and in about 2 or 3 months, I had slowly taken the piece apart. And some of my friends who came said, what have you been doing with that furniture? The whole, you know, my loft was like all glowing, they said, and stuff like that. And then, so the piece ended up when I originally finished it at the UCLA, was it not the UCLA? That's another interesting kind of story. But when I finished deconstructing it to release the spirit, a lot of people came to that area because there were a number of artists working at the fair to watch every day the piece sort of being taken apart, and they said that what the result was, like the furniture pieces that I had in the show. And so that for me was this sort of confirmed a certain thing about the idea of spirit in things, and how spirit in things, if you're full of love and so on, and you sit somewhere, you just leave a puddle of it, you know.
In the furniture.
Right. And it's like, you know, this was interesting with my mom, because after a while I used to run around looking for puddles of love, you know, and
that's beautiful.
She said, what kind of artist are you? So there are all these kind of connections that make clear that there's something else going on, even with the most utilitarian kind of functional things that you hold in your hand, you know, as you turn over the scrambled eggs.
Yeah, the spatula. I think it's true. There's so many things that we, you know, the furniture that we use every day that becomes a reference to the body, the mattresses, the sofas, and that the releasing of the spirit is often, I think, what inspired some people to ask Raphael at the time, you know, take this piece of furniture, it has bad memories for me, release the bad memories and create something, you know, beautiful and profound out of that kind of sense of destruction.
Let me add something to this story, because it's really interesting. I'm working on this piece, and there were a large crowd. A lot of people were curious about that whole story. And so I was working and got an assistant to work with me, and we worked carefully, took it all apart, and slowly I put a projection of a picture of the daughter on it, and that picture became lighter and lighter and lighter also. And in the meantime, what did I do? I played, for some reason, I felt a need to play Pennies from Heaven. You know? And it was Bing Crosby singing Pennies from Heaven. And I felt, you know, somehow there was a relationship of the pennies from heaven and the whole situation. What happened was that when I finished the piece, the person that ran the fair said, I want to purchase that piece from you. You have no idea, he said to me, what that piece is about for me. And meanwhile, I always played, you know, Bing Crosby's Pennies from Heaven with the piece. And he said, I want to tell you a story. He said, I live in California along the you know, ocean area, and he used to go up, he had a cabin up in the mountains, and he would go up there with his significant other, and they'd go up there together. And it was snowing, and he took he was driving too fast, took a sharp turn, went off a little cliff about 100 and some feet, plunged down, and he had one of these cars with the metal bar they had across the top, you know? And she woke up, and she broke a finger and a nose and stuff, but he was out, kind of thing. And so she slowly fanned him for, I don't know, half a day. And he came to consciousness, and he looked out, and he said, well, how long have I been here? How did I get here? And she explained the whole thing. And he looked down just outside the car, and there was hundreds of pennies. Hundreds of pennies were there. And, you know, I just did the hum of, you know, Bing Crosby's Pennies from Heaven went through my head. And he felt somehow landing in all those pennies saved their life. Right?
That's a beautiful memory, beautiful. Because you brought up this idea of, you know, this order of things, I'm also interested in the usage of his, you know, Raphael has always been interested in new technology, but in old and humble materials, sort of like at the same time. The scratch laser videos, some digital videos that use moving color. I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about this juxtaposition of old technology, new technology, humble materials. If you have thoughts, either of you?
Yeah, the use of technology in the work.
Yeah.
It's really everywhere, no? It's, I mean, I think there's certainly an interest for moving image. I think that's a key point. I would, point out to the mid-'80s videos. I mentioned the early films before, but in relation to technology, that's, I think, one of the most interesting aspects of the work is there. And I've been emphasizing these works a lot in like tours I've been giving, or not just in conversations, with colleagues coming seeing the show, because how they really somehow anticipate or are part of a conversation. I don't know if it's ahead of time or not, that's another question, but around electronic music, for instance. No, this idea of the loop, this idea of the scratch as techniques of editing, of creating, again, a sense of disorientation, a sense of juxtaposed or superimposed temporalities, liminal spaces, subliminal spaces in those images. The works being the video works that Raphael did in the mid-'80s using a joystick to manipulate a laser disc, right? If I'm describing it correctly. So that, I think, it's a very relevant and very innovative way of thinking of image and found image, especially. That I can really think of so many connections, with video artists that would, emerge later, reflecting upon, similar issues and interests.
Yeah, the connection with electronic music, for sure. As we were coming in to sit, the soundtrack that was playing, we recognized it as the soundtrack from some of the videos where you hear a repeated millisecond of the film that's repeated over and over again. It becomes like a genre on its own.
Yes.
The sounds.
Yes. And the materiality of them, those works, they do have like a strong physical phenomenon on them.
Yeah, and what you were saying, the Julieta was talking about the films as like the destruction of the narrative. When you go and watch the laser videos, some of them are hard to watch for very long. They're disturbing.
Yes.
And when they go on for 7 or 8 minutes, it's visceral. It's like you feel it really in your body as you're watching these.
It's completely.
It becomes almost like a deprivation experiment, which I did a lot of research on, and where you sort of leave your body, but in the process you somehow feel you left a part of you behind. And you sort of watch the images overlapping and like septs, like hearing other languages and so on.
Yeah.
It takes you like into another life space, which was interesting because I was doing a lot of research on reincarnation and that kind of thing in terms of spirit and objects and so on. Which there's a lot of that research which I don't discuss that openly because I don't want people sort of walking down the street and going, oh, there's Raphael's coming.
Manipulating the eyeballs. I think, we have, according to my time here, 1 minute and 11 seconds left, so I think it might be a good time to see if there's questions from the audience, unless there's a burning issue that either of you want to.
No, I think it would be lovely to hear from the audience, but I
Yes.
have a question for you just before.
Yeah.
I'd like to play audience for a second here. About the memorial, no? That's such a wonderful piece that we didn't have the chance to discuss much during the last few minutes. And that it was a very, I would just like to share that anecdote with the, with the audience. Also the fact that you approached us to, donate that work to El Museo. And your retrospective was in preparation already. We were working on it, but you, I think very movingly so, asked us to show it before, and there was a reason for that. And so we did like a small, like a short, short duration exhibition to show it. Yeah, that's such an important work, no? That's been then, shown in the retrospective, and it's been like widely discussed and reproduced. And there's this work that I think it's really like a monumental work of your later work, of your later practice, that, talks about your ongoing interest in colonialism as like a longue durée. No, I think that's an expression coined by French historian Fernand Braudel, that I think Chon uses in his essay to discuss your engagement with the theme of colonialism, the long durée, the long duration of colonialism, appearing in different moments throughout your language and your interests and your works. But I wanted to ask about the genesis of that work that so openly and overtly addresses colonialism.
Well, I've been studying in Las Casas and all of those works for many years. Prior to founding the Museo, I was very much involved in all of that history. And I used to periodically dream of myself in the midst of some kind of battle like that, where I'd be laying amongst all of the people dying and, all of these weapons and stuff. And years passed, and periodically that dream would come up again. And then I decided that it was calling me, to reconcile it. And I feel that way about a lot of my work, that if I pass a couch that calls me that there's something that has to be reconciled, even if it's just to launder it. I was always responding to situations like that, and that was one of the situations where I said I need to finally reconcile what needed to be. It reminded me of that movie later on where the psychologist didn't know he was dead, and this child was leading him around to unfinished business. Well, it was like, oh, that might have been alongside the other dreaming I was doing. Was that kind of situation. But again, I have a family that just believes in ghosts. What can I say?
It's part of your environment, your life.
Yes.
Yeah, but the fact that you wanted it to be shown in 2020 was because of the
it
pandemic.
had to be. It had
COVID.
to be. That was part of the reconciling.
Yes. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear from the audience if there are questions, and I think there's folks with microphones circulating.
Some people say it's not relevant anymore, you can't shock people. And when you were doing a lot of your earlier work, I'm sure a lot of people were shocked. It was different, and it was shocking to a lot of people, but do you think that term is still relevant these days, the avant-garde?
Some of what you said got muffled for me a little. Could you?
I was just wondering if you considered the term avant-garde still relevant.
Oh, avant-garde.
Pardon me?
Did you say avant-garde?
Avant-garde, yes.
Relevant. I think ideas have a way of creating a bridge with that part of our whole bio-brain system architecture, which precedes it, and so that those ideas can put a foot on the door between what mind matter thing, where mind is this. It's a history of impulses. It's which then a narrative forms around these impulses, and my feeling is that that cells have consciousness, and that and that we also, like the furniture, we pick up things. You know, the idea of a virus and picking up a virus, and there are more complex things than the virus, but the virus is a part of, which can lead us to a life. And it's within that framework. For instance, my sister would call it a walk-in. You know, she would say that there are certain times, for instance, when you get injured, like a concussion, or you hurt yourself so badly you're lost in the pain of the hurt, that you leave yourself open for that kind of connection, like the love puddle. And so you then make this link, and you then want to know it more. You want to know it better. And sometimes you find yourself with people who have a lot of those qualities of that puddle. You know, and that's a way of reconciling. Another way is language and ideas and so on that lead you into. They're like breadcrumbs. You know, they carry you along, these ideas, and then suddenly it's something materializes from it, certain kind of alchemy, you know, or Kabbalah stuff. That's, I don't know if that helps, but.
No problem. There's another question.
Hello.
Hi.
Before I ask my question, I just want to say I'm so grateful for the body of your work, because I'm from the Bronx and I'm a New Rican, and so like it means a lot to me. My question is, I read a really good essay from Lorraine O'Grady, and I think it's Olympia's Maid. She talks about her as a performance artist. She felt uncomfortable after a certain point as she aged, because she felt like the audience started being prejudiced because her body was aging. They applied a lot of, decay to her work. Mm-hmm. I wonder how you look at performance now as you're getting older.
Performance in what? Is there a larger context that you're associating?
I think, is this still okay?
Yeah.
I think more towards yourself now. Do you reflect on like maybe if it's something that you want to continue to be doing, or do you worry about how audiences interpret, what you're doing now that your body is changing?
No.
Okay, cool. Good.
Can I just add to that?
Say something. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Lorraine's performance work is quite different from his, though. Lorraine O'Grady's performance work is often about the body. It's deals with Black female subjectivity. But it's not necessarily having to do with interactivity or healing. I would not necessarily say that Lorraine's work is similar to Raphael's, because we make the work together in Raphael's pieces.
I think maybe what the reference was to, like how people are seeing Lorraine's aging body and responding to it in a performance.
Right.
But the thing is, like, you know, to break a piano is, it's a,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But look at the great way that he's done this piece. I mean, I was concerned, right? I was like, oh, Ralph's gonna do a piece, but he freaking made it happen, right? He found other people to do the work. I honestly believe that if you're an artist, and there's numerous artists who are still working today in their 90s, you're a really great artist, you find ways around to still make it work, and that's what makes him so important. You know, like there's no disability, right? There's no disability. There's just opportunity with Ralph in some ways. And that's what he's shown me in this piece. There's always opportunity if you twist it the right way. Think beyond the boundaries.
Yeah. And the change in scale from the grand piano to the toy piano, which this isn't the first time, right? A performance from Arte No Es Vida, was it?
Yeah.
Included baby toy pianos, right?
My sister never forgave me.
For destroying the family piano, the baby piano, the toy piano.
Yes.
I think there was a question over there.
Oh, there's another question? Oh, great.
Who has the mic?
Hi,
Oh,
hello.
sis.
I just wanted to ask you like an universal question, because I'm from Argentina, I'm not from New York, I'm not from Puerto Rico, but your work really touched me. But since we're sitting here in this space and you had this vision of this space, which is really amazing to be, you know, sitting here and you thought of it, you made it happen. My question is that, do you, when you dream of your work, is that dream always the same dream, the same vision, or that vision evolves with time?
Well, what happens is that I always dream of people somehow that are interested in my work. What I mean to say is, are part of it, some metaphysical way, are a part of it. And in the dream, this person appears. And sometimes there's conversation, and sometimes there's just a hello, Ralph. And so I say, hello.
I'll freak out.
Right.
And then you know, I wake up and I say, you know, I wonder what connection that person has with me in relation to this object that I was working on, this piece of furniture or piano, or what is the connection? It's sort of like when I was in college, I had this professor who was always chasing me around like, you did this wrong, Raphael, and you did that wrong, Raphael, and you did that wrong, Raphael. And so my sister, of course, who's an astrologer, had some psychic friends. The term psychic is kind of interesting in itself. And so she said, we have to visit this psychic. We have to find out what's the relationship between you two. And well, she took me to him, and he went into, I guess you call it a trance. And he came back after about 15 minutes, and he told me things like I was part of the first wave of the Atlanteans and stuff like that, which a lot of people say, aha, see, there's a clue that somebody's making something up. And so he said to me, well, this professor and you were in one of these wars during the Babylonian Sumerian period, and that you were on opposite sides, and you were always, you were related, you were like cousins, and you would never forgave each other, and every time you would meet in a piece of the desert, there'd be a battle. And so it had never resolved itself. And so he said, he gave me an idea of how to resolve it. And so, I mean, it was simple. He had me connect up with the family through cousins, and then back to my family, and open discussion about those wars, and a lot of memories of them. And slowly, he stopped, chasing me like to get me caught somehow and for being, bad. Or he always say, well, the spelling here is really peculiar. Why do you use it? And things like that. And I would say, I just thought that made sense to spell stop, S-T-O-P. And so I would say that there are realms within which we are aliens in when we try to visit, and times when we're not. And I've always enjoyed the times when I've not felt like an alien, when someone appears standing in front of me who just says to me, "Hi, Ralph." I just, it just seemed to me to say, "Hi."
Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question.
I just want to say that
Patrick.
I'm really, really enjoying right now the idea that 52 years ago you founded el Museo del Barrio. You kind of changed the art world in New York by introducing a Latino institution. And 52 years after, you're here now. Your retrospective is in the Museo del Barrio galleries. We just experienced something incredible. You're revitalizing the energy by doing this work, these performances. So I just want to thank you. Thank you in the name of the community. Thank you in the name of the Museo del Barrio. 52 years of love history. Thank you, Raphael.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. I just want to tell you that the galleries are still open, so if you haven't had a chance to see the show, really run and see it because it is fantastic. Please enjoy, and thank you for coming.
Is today the last day?
Tomorrow is the last day, so since you're here.